Henry Bailey believed he had experienced it all, until a 6-year-old child wearing a red jumper entered his glass-enclosed office, presented him with a handmade resume, and declared, "I require employment." Henry Bailey's day started as most did, early, methodical, and planned down to each minute. His high-end vehicle entered the subterranean parking area of the steel and glass building he possessed, and by 8 a.m. he had reached his top-floor office, examining quarterly forecasts. His jacket was immaculate, his necktie perfect, and his coffee remained untouched while he reviewed correspondence with the disciplined focus of someone who had ceased noticing his accumulated authority long ago. His calendar held numerous gatherings, telephone conversations, and briefings, and he planned no alterations to it. That changed when his secretary, noticeably distressed and uncertain, knocked and entered without awaiting permission. "Sir, there's a visitor for you." "It's a young child," she stated uncomfortably, clutching a small document in her palm as though uncertain whether to find humor or alarm in the situation. Henry glanced upward, bewildered. "A youngster," he echoed without inflection, anticipating some form of confusion. Before his words could finish, the office entrance widened further, and his most unanticipated visitor entered. She appeared no older than 6 years. Her pale brown locks were somewhat disheveled, her brown gaze wide and composed. She had on a red pullover, a denim dress, and worn athletic shoes. A small, aged rucksack sat on her back, and between her fingers she grasped a single document. Without awaiting anyone's words, she approached his workspace, rose onto her toes to access it, and set the document down. Then she gazed upward and stated, as plainly and forthrightly as though this were completely ordinary, "I require employment." Henry remained speechless initially. He wasn't certain how to react. The space was soundless apart from the hum of the metropolis beyond the floor-length windows. Gradually, he retrieved the document. It represented a child's version of a resume. Composed in broad, irregular script, it read, "I can perform cleaning. I'm silent. I don't weep before others. I can assist. I can acquire knowledge." Stars were sketched in the margins, and a small, unsteady heart appeared beside the sentence that stated, "Please." He placed the document aside, regarded her once more, and crouched near his seat. His tone became gentler as he inquired, "Why have you come here, dear? You're a young child." "You don't require employment." She observed him, unblinking, and responded with a composure far exceeding her age. "My mother is passing away," she stated. No weeping, no theatrics, simply reality, the atmosphere in the space transformed. Henry, someone who had constructed enterprises and eliminated rivals without hesitation, experienced his throat constricting. She voiced it as though she had repeated it numerous times previously, as though she had acknowledged it but declined to yield to it. Her small palms were formed into fists at her flanks, and her tone remained steady. "I must assist her," she continued. "We lack funds. If I work, perhaps she can survive." For an instant, Henry Bailey, the individual who believed he had witnessed everything, couldn't draw breath. Not because he lacked words, but because, for the first occasion in years, someone had entered his office and demonstrated what powerlessness meant. Yet, this young child wasn't powerless. She had arrived independently. She possessed a purpose, and she had proceeded directly to the summit. He rose gradually, the document still in his grasp, and stated, "What's your designation?" The child responded immediately, Emma Miller." That marked the instant his existence began its transformation. He remained unaware, but nothing regarding his existence, his enterprise, his principles, his understanding of strength would remain unchanged. Henry remained in his office's center holding Emma's handwritten resume, his thoughts spinning with inquiries and countless conflicting considerations. The child remained there silently, waiting, her gaze concentrated, her small figure entirely motionless. No indication of apprehension or uncertainty appeared in her bearing, solely resolve. Henry had received million-dollar proposals from industry executives who couldn't dominate the space the way this 6-year-old just accomplished. He lowered himself gradually into his seat, indicating for her to occupy the position across from him. She ascended into the oversized hide chair with difficulty, her feet unable to contact the floor, and clasped her palms in her lap. He cleared his windpipe and inclined forward, maintaining his tone composed. "Emma, do you comprehend where you are?" She nodded immediately. "You're Mr. Bailey. You possess considerable wealth. My mother stated the individuals with wealth are those who can assist when others won't." Her response was so straightforward, it rendered him momentarily astonished. Henry regarded his secretary, still immobile in the entrance, and gestured for her to provide them seclusion. The entrance clicked closed, and the office descended into a quietness interrupted solely by the noise of vehicles far beneath. Henry inclined forward once more, this occasion more tenderly. "Can you describe what occurred to your mother?" Emma nodded. "She's ill. She doesn't reveal everything, but I comprehend it's her physical form. She used to possess strength. She cannot work presently, and the medical facility stated it requires excessive funds." Her tone was distinct, as though she had practiced these statements countless times. "We had to depart our dwelling. Now we occupy one chamber, and she rests most hours. Sometimes I prepare grain for the evening meal." He experienced something rigid tighten in his torso. He had originated from poverty, but not this manner. He had never been 6 years old and approaching a CEO's entrance requesting employment. "Does she know you arrived here?" he inquired gently. "No," Emma stated. "She would have refused. But I discovered your designation from a publication. I know your structure because it's large and gleaming, and individuals say you resolve matters rapidly. So I considered perhaps you could resolve this." Henry inhaled deeply and rose, approaching the window. The metropolis extended beneath him, enormous and uncaring, and he recognized how numerous individuals moved through it daily, silently suffering, invisible. He rotated back toward the child, who was presently moving her limbs slightly, her attention resting on the bookcase behind his workspace. "You're exceptionally courageous, Emma," he stated. "Most grown individuals wouldn't have possessed the bravery to accomplish what you just did." She lifted her shoulders. "It's not courage. It's simply what one does when one loves another." Her statement struck more powerfully than she could have comprehended. Henry's own history flickered through his consciousness, recollections of departing from individuals he'd valued, pursuing status, dominance, structure. And here existed this child, positioned in the wreckage of her existence, still selecting love before fear. He crouched once more, aligned with her gaze. "Acceptable," he stated quietly. "Let's visit your mother," she blinked. "Truly," he nodded. "I'm not guaranteeing everything, but I wish to encounter her, and I wish to assist if possible." She descended from the seat and modified the fastenings of her rucksack. "She's at Mercy Medical Center," Emma stated, her tone suddenly optimistic. Chamber 12. "She rests extensively, but I believe she'd appreciate you." Henry smiled for the initial occasion that day. "Then let's proceed." And with that, he inhaled deeply, secured his overcoat, and departed his office, not to a committee gathering or professional luncheon, but alongside a 6-year-old child who had just recomposed the most significant principle of his existence: certain matters cannot wait. The journey to Mercy Medical Center felt more prolonged than it was, not due to congestion or remoteness, but due to the significance of what Henry was approaching. He had devoted his existence surrounded by determinations measured in financial returns and achievement metrics. But presently he was following a 6-year-old child to encounter a woman he'd never observed, motivated not by calculation but by something profounder, a distress in his torso he hadn't experienced in years. Emma occupied the rear portion of the corporate vehicle, her limbs moving beneath her, her rucksack held firmly in her lap. She didn't communicate extensively, solely providing guidance when requested, and devoted most of the journey observing through the window with a silent concentration that Henry discovered both devastating and humbling. When they arrived before the modest medical center, there was nothing exceptional about it, just a gray structure with deteriorated signage and windows too diminutive to admit adequate sunlight. But to Emma, it was evidently everything. She exited rapidly, then waited adjacent to the entrance until Henry accompanied her. As they entered the reception area, the medical attendant at the forward desk glanced upward in astonishment. Henry remained attired in his custom overcoat and costly footwear, a figure that attracted notice, but it was Emma who advanced initially and communicated first. "Chamber 12, please," she stated. "She's my mother." The medical attendant paused, then nodded, indicating down the corridor. Henry followed Emma past deteriorated tile surfaces and flaking pigment, each movement heavier than the previous. When they accessed the entrance, Emma halted, her small palm on the mechanism. "She's extremely fatigued," she cautioned him. "Sometimes she doesn't awaken when I communicate to her." Henry provided a gentle nod, and Emma advanced the entrance. Within, the chamber was obscure and silent. A woman reclined in the medical bed, wan and slender, with various tubes extending from her limbs and a cardiac monitor producing steady rhythm. Her countenance was delicate, deteriorated by exhaustion, but tranquil in its stillness. Emma proceeded directly to her flank, positioned her rucksack on the seat, and grasped for her mother's palm. "Mother, I brought another person," she whispered. "He's the individual I mentioned to you." Henry remained at the bed's base, uncertain how to proceed, uncertain what to express. This woman, Sarah Miller, had evidently endured more than most individuals could manage. Her skin appeared almost translucent, her torso ascending gradually, as though each respiration required her exertion. There existed a strength in her even while she rested, something unspoken that persisted in the chamber. He advanced forward and tenderly positioned the child's resume on the bedside surface. "I don't know if you can perceive me," he stated gently, "but I encountered your daughter today. And I don't believe I'll ever remain the same once more." Emma occupied the seat adjacent to her mother and regarded Henry. She used to work extensively. She was a medical attendant. She assisted individuals, but when she became ill, no one assisted her. "That's why I approached you." Henry crouched adjacent to the bed, one palm resting on the blanket's margin. "You performed the correct action," he stated, his tone quiet but resolute, "and I'm going to assist her presently." The medical attendant entered several minutes afterward to examine vitals. She regarded Henry, then Emma, and appeared to perceive this wasn't a conventional visit. She whispered that Sarah had been maintaining stability for days, but would require advanced intervention. Intervention the medical center could no longer afford to continue. Henry listened attentively, posed precise inquiries, and when the medical attendant departed, he stepped beyond to place two communications. The initial was to his personal physician, requesting a complete assessment of Sarah Miller's documentation and an immediate relocation to a private facility. The subsequent was to his legal personnel, ordering a discreet financial configuration to encompass whatever followed, regardless of the expense. When he returned to the chamber, Emma was resting her head adjacent to her mother's palm. Her gaze flickered with fatigue, but she regarded upward when he occupied the position next to her. "Are you truly going to assist?" she inquired. Henry grasped for her small palm and held it tenderly. "Yes, Emma. I guarantee." He didn't completely comprehend what had occurred that day, how a young child with a rucksack and a document had demolished his routine and fractured open a portion of him he believed was long concealed. But as he occupied that silent medical chamber, observing over a woman he didn't know and a child who had trusted him with everything, he comprehended this wasn't a deviation. This was the commencement of something that would transform his existence permanently. The subsequent morning, Henry arrived at the medical facility just following sunrise. He had scarcely rested the previous night, his consciousness consumed by considerations of Sarah and Emma. The vision of the young child positioned adjacent to her mother's medical bed had remained with him like a burden on his torso. It wasn't compassion that troubled him, it was obligation, a variety he hadn't known previously, not the corporate variety that accompanied shareholders and time limits, but a human variety, the variety that made one wish to appear before anyone requested. When he entered the medical center, the medical attendants at the forward desk acknowledged him with a combination of astonishment and respect. He had already configured for Sarah to be relocated that day to one of the private medical facilities he funded through his enterprise's foundation. Specialists had examined her documentation overnight, and an intervention plan had been composed with aggressive but optimistic measures. Everything was advancing rapidly, but Henry wasn't interested in waiting for administrative procedures to dominate. He had observed too numerous determinations made gradually for the purpose of procedure. This one was individual. This one would advance at his tempo. He proceeded down the now recognizable corridor toward Chamber 12, transporting a paper container filled with morning meal, fruit, a baked good, and a small cup of chocolate beverage. Emma was already conscious, positioned in the seat adjacent to her mother, her knees elevated to her torso. She regarded upward when he entered and provided him a drowsy smile, which, despite everything, still possessed the silent capacity to soften him. He presented her the container, and she accepted it with a small nod of appreciation. Sarah was still resting, her respiration steady but shallow, the devices around her silently tracking each movement. Henry occupied the position adjacent to the bed and tenderly updated Emma on the arrangement. He explained that they were going to relocate her mother to a superior medical facility where she could receive stronger intervention. Emma didn't pose inquiries. She simply listened, holding the warm cup of chocolate beverage between her palms as though it were something sacred. "Will she awaken there?" she inquired following an instant. Henry didn't offer vacant guarantees. "She possesses a superior opportunity presently," he stated, "and will be there daily." The relocation occurred silently just before midday. A private emergency vehicle arrived, and Henry insisted on traveling with them. Emma occupied the position adjacent to him, holding her mother's palm firmly, never once releasing during the journey. Henry placed several more communications while in the rear of the vehicle, organizing a provisional chamber for Emma near the new medical facility's pediatric section and ensuring Sarah would receive the optimal care available. By the occasion they arrived, a medical personnel was waiting. The chamber Sarah was transported to was illuminated and expansive, with large windows that admitted warm illumination. Emma immediately extracted her small rucksack and positioned a drawing on the bedside surface, a depiction of her, her mother, and presently another person. Henry. His designation was inscribed under the figure wearing a jacket, drawn with rectangular shoulders and a smiling countenance. That evening, following the medical attendants had examined vitals and devices had been calibrated, Henry occupied the family recreation area with Emma. She had transformed into a clean pullover one of the medical attendants had discovered, her locks freshly groomed and secured back. She appeared younger once more, less guarded, as though the burden of survival had loosened sufficiently to permit childhood to respire. "Do you believe everything will remain like this?" Emma inquired, her tone quiet. Henry didn't deceive. "It won't always be simple," he stated, "but I'll be here. We'll progress through it collectively." She grasped for his palm and whispered, "I'm pleased I approached your office." Henry compressed her palm tenderly. "So am I," he stated. "You transformed everything." And as the medical facility quieted for the night, Henry remained at their flank, no longer a visitor, no longer an individual existing behind glass and wealth, but another person deeply established in a new existence, one constructed not on designations or transactions, but on trust, love, and the unanticipated courage of a young child with a rucksack and a hope too substantial to transport alone. The 8th day felt like the commencement of something neither of them had dared to trust in at the beginning. The medical facility, once frigid and clinical in Henry's consciousness, presently held warmth in the silent instants. It was in the manner Emma proceeded down the corridor with her drawing secured under her limb. In the manner, Sarah's tone grew just slightly stronger with each passing hour. And in the manner, Henry no longer examined his device every 10 minutes, but instead waited for Emma's narratives as though they were the most significant gatherings he could attend. That morning, Sarah, elevated in her medical bed independently for the initial occasion. Her cheeks possessed a faint coloration, and her gaze was clearer than it had been in over a week. Emma was practically radiating as she fed her mother portions of warm grain and described everything that had occurred while she'd been resting. She communicated about the garden, the chocolate beverage, and how Henry assisted her purchase new marking instruments. She even shared the narrative of how she entered his office, how frightened she had been, and how certain she had felt that he would listen. Sarah listened, moisture descending down her cheeks, not from distress or apprehension, but from the overwhelming recognition that she hadn't forfeited everything after all. Henry departed beyond to provide them an instant alone and discovered himself remaining in the corridor, observing a framed artwork on the surface that he'd never noticed previously. It was a watercolor of a tree, strong and complete, but its foundations extended unevenly beneath it, contacting stones, fractures, and concealed objects. For the initial occasion in a considerable while, he comprehended the metaphor without compelling himself to. Objects don't have to develop perfectly to be alive. They simply require space, illumination, and duration. Afterward that day, he encountered Sarah's principal physician and social personnel. They informed him that Sarah would likely be relocated to a recovery accommodation within several days and could commence rehabilitation by the subsequent week. There existed hope presently not just for survival, but for restoration. Sarah would be able to ambulate once more, to work once more in duration. But most significantly, she would be able to exist. Following the gatherings, Henry returned to the chamber to discover Emma drawing a new depiction. This one was of a dwelling, a brilliant sun, and three figures positioned beyond: a woman, an individual in a jacket, and a child with a secured hairstyle holding both their palms. He occupied the position adjacent to her and inquired, "Where's this?" She smiled and stated, "Our residence, when we're all collectively." He absorbed the constriction in his windpipe and communicated to her gently, "Then let's make that actual." By early evening, he had already taken measures to prepare a dwelling for them in one of his structures near the metropolis's botanical gardens. It was provisional until Sarah was strong sufficiently to determine what followed, but it was warm and accessible, with abundant space for Emma's art and publications, and even a small workspace Henry had ordered for her following observing her inscribe on medical trays. That night, before he departed, Sarah grasped for his palm. Her tone was quiet but steady. "You transformed our existences," she stated. He regarded her, humbled and profoundly affected. "You transformed mine initially," he replied. "Emma approached my office and reminded me of everything I ceased comprehending how to be." When he kissed Emma goodnight and rotated to depart, she proceeded after him and embraced firmly around the midsection. "You'll return tomorrow, correct?" she inquired. He crouched down, held her close, and whispered, "I'm not proceeding anywhere." As he departed into the cool night atmosphere, the metropolis illuminations blinking across the skyline, Henry recognized something profound. The individual who had once constructed his existence on agreements and time limits presently possessed something far more valuable. A young child had approached his existence and transformed its trajectory with 5 statements. "I require employment, please." And in responding her appeal, he had discovered the solely position that ever truly mattered, being another person who remained. Being another person who selected love over comfort, individuals over authority, and purpose over pride. He had finally arrived at residence. The conclusion of this narrative resonates profoundly because it doesn't rely on grand demonstrations or dramatic miracles. It's silent, individual, and earned through small, human instants. What makes it so powerful is the transformation that transpires not just in Henry, but in the manner we as readers arrive to comprehend what truly matters. An individual who once measured success in figures and dominance discovers that actual meaning originates from appearing, remaining, and selecting individuals over authority. Emma's courage isn't sensationalized. It's honest, motivated by love and necessity. And Sarah's strength, even in her silence, holds everything collectively. The beauty of this conclusion is that it doesn't pretend everything will be perfect, but it guarantees that no one will confront what follows next alone. That message, that love is an action, a determination, a commitment, is timeless. To me, this is not just a narrative about rescuing another person. It's a narrative about being rescued by the very act of caring. And in a world often governed by remoteness and distraction, that reminder is both shocking and quietly profound.